Good evening, afternoon, and morning. Welcome to the webinar on migrating Dynamics AX to the cloud with AX for Pharma. Our presenter today will be Andrea Russi, CEO of AX for Pharma. Andrea, over to you.
Thank you, Cheryl. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you today. We will be discussing today how to move from Microsoft Dynamics AX 2009, 2012, various versions, to the cloud, to Microsoft Dynamics 365 for finance and operations. We'll be looking at the advantages for life sciences companies like yours in doing so, and also discussing considerations, risks, and points of attention on how to do this effectively and in a validated way. So, we are a Microsoft Gold partner, AX for Pharma. My co-presenters, I'll be doing most of the talking, but co-presenters are Pete Martin, Chief Growth Officer, and Massimo Crudeli, Director of Client Solutions at AX for Pharma. And thank you, Cheryl, for organizing this. Cheryl is our marketing manager. About our company, one slide. Who we are. Fully pharma-focused resource for implementation and validation of Microsoft Dynamics ERP. Only in life sciences, meaning pharma, biotech, and medical devices. For the last 13 years, we've only implemented Dynamics in this space, nothing else. Based in the US and Europe, we are certified ISO. That is very important in your industry, of course, and also certified as a Microsoft Gold partner, and our solution is certified as well. So we are both a provider of services and a provider of an ISV solution. And both as a provider of services, we are certified, Gold certified, and as a provider of a solution, our ISV solution is on AppSource, a Microsoft AppSource. So it is classified as a COTS solution, GAMP5 Category 4, configurable software, not a customization. What we do, we implement multinational ERP projects in life sciences. Again, based on Dynamics 365 for finance and operations. Our main focus is Europe, and our focus is Europe and the US. We also have some customers in other countries, but mainly focusing on those two principal markets. Given that we only focus on this industry, we don't really come to you and say, okay, please let us know what you'd like to do, and then we'll see if we can do it, because that is a practice that often brings to a partner who's not expert in life sciences to a company that's not expert in ERP projects. You hope to do as few as possible in your lifetime, and maybe coming up with something which is a local optimal. Maybe you reach the top of the hill, but not the top of the mountain, because neither of the two companies know what the mountain is. The mountain is the highest you can reach, both from a technology perspective, but also in understanding GMP processes. And we implement this by offering industry accelerators and best practices. For example, our FDA toolkit and computer system validation toolkit offers templates for a validation master plan. We offer URS, user requirement specifications out of the box, test scripts, of course, the traceability matrix, and so on. In addition to this, the URS, which are more best practices for the industry, as a company, we also directly offer computer system validation / computer software assurance services. And this means that we not only can implement, but either we work with your QA department, of course, quality assurance, and also possibly an external one if you'd like, but we can directly help you validate the solution. So there's not the ping pong of working with a third party that maybe doesn't understand Dynamics or doesn't understand technology, because it can be done. Of course, it's a triangle which works. You, the customer, your validation partner, and us. There's less overlapping and redundancy. We can work that way, and we can work directly. A little bit more on the consulting side, on the process side, we can offer business process optimization, meaning that we can help optimize your processes based on best practices. Given that we have implemented this solution around the world, and as we know, for example, the ICH International Conference for Harmonization is trying to align North America, Europe, and Japan best practices. All these are already embedded in our methods, in our configuration, in our solution. So if you would like for us to do that, we can help offering that service, all the way to industry-specific management consulting, for example, in optimizing your clinical trials. Regarding our differentiators, first of all, we have the visibility of both GXP, but also other requirements for compliance, for example, SOX. We see customers that are listed on the NASDAQ are required to be SOX 404 compliant, that there is a separate effort between SOX and GXP. In Europe, there are different laws for this. For example, in Italy, there's Law 231 of 2001. In other countries, there are other laws similarly from a financial perspective. But there is 80% overlap between GMP and SOX. And so we have this experience that can help you have a more harmonized validation effort that comprises both aspects and not just one or the other. Regarding functionality, our solution based on Microsoft Dynamics 365, we call it powered from Dynamics 365, offers not only financial and operations functionality, but also LIMS, Laboratory Information Management System, weighing and dispensing, advanced warehouse management, because weighing, dispensing, and advanced warehouse management go hand in hand. We need to move the material in the warehouse with a handheld device and then weigh it, create a new package, add a label to it, send it to production, and consume it. This is putting together production, ERP from a financial perspective, handheld devices from a warehouse management perspective, and ultimately interfacing with scales for weighing and dispensing. So all this has to come together, and more often than not, solutions cannot do all this, meaning you have to stitch them together and then they become custom, and then it's more difficult to validate. One other aspect of what we offer is clinical trials, clinical supplies. So among other companies, Pfizer is using our solution to produce their clinical trials worldwide, and we are also serving startups. So we can go with the same solution with different degrees of configuration from a startup all the way to tier one pharmaceutical companies. Examples of startups are Inovio Pharmaceutical. It's a company that signed with us to start the project last year at the end of June and went live in January after 6 months and 6 days, including manufacturing, GMP, and validation. So this is the gamut we can span from pre-commercial to commercial, from startups all the way to companies, tier one companies. Same solution, different levels of configuration because it's a configurable solution. One last point critical for the cloud, automated testing. In order to maintain validation and perform compliant upgrades, we need to retest every time there's an upgrade. Microsoft requires, we'll see it in a little bit, minimum 2 upgrades per year. And then the question becomes, how do we do that? That's part of what we support. This is one slide on us. I'll go back to the agenda. And the points are, why move to the cloud and why now? That's the first point. So what is the benefits of going from on-premise to the cloud? Why do it now and not another time? Benefits and considerations, less risks of moving to the cloud. Validated cloud, meaning that this cloud has to be validated, otherwise it doesn't apply for our industry. Possible next steps, and we'll open to Q&A. So if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. We'll take note of them and leave plenty of time at the end to address these. Why move to the cloud? Why now? As many of you know, Microsoft Dynamics AX is at end of service. EOS, end of service, in Microsoft jargon. It means that if you have AX 2012, 2009, 12, R1, R2, or R3, which added handheld devices, as many of you know, will be supported only till April 2022 and R3 till January 2023. At this point, we'll have this decision. It's binary. Remain on premises with legacy, continue using an unsupported version on premises, which is high risk because we know that in our industry, we need to apply patches, we need to be compliant, especially in case of, changes of some type that may even not be related to GMP. If we have a new finance requirement, a new financial requirement, we have to implement that as well, but it won't be available. Of course, if we have a cybersecurity requirement, even if it's on premises, we need to apply that, and also those will not be made. So this is one of the reasons it's more defensive to move to the cloud. Other aspects. So in addition to non-security issues, regulatory and tax updates, and future functionality updates will be halted. This is the end of extended support. It's after 10 years, 5 plus 5. So Microsoft does 5 regular, 5 years extended support. It will be stopped. Self-service support will end and warranty claims will expire. So the system will be out of warranty even if you are current on maintenance. Microsoft still offers extended support options, so you can verify that with your local Microsoft, and we can help you with that if you'd like. But these do not offer all the benefits of extended premium support. And in general, the on-premise infrastructure will become more costly to maintain. This means that many of you have seen that sometimes you have a device, especially in pharma, we see the devices are not always upgraded as quickly as we'd like. So we have a customer that has a handheld device, bought it 5 years ago, which is some time ago. It still had Windows CE. So Windows CE is a very, very old mobile operating system. But that device was the only one that had the required level of ruggedness. It could, go at very low temperature, maybe environments which were to some level toxic. And this device was never certified on a system beyond Windows CE. It was still being purchased because of the hardware. So we know how difficult it is in our industry to upgrade. And in this case, if we keep on the on-premise solution, maybe new servers will come up which are not as compatible with the older versions of operating system. And then we're going to have a problem. And if a hard disk, if RAM does not work with the software, there's nothing much we can do. We have to then create virtual machines and all that, and it gets very, very complicated. So as you know, the cost can go up very quickly in maintaining obsolete systems. Risks. These are risks. It's important to address them, to look at them. These are risks of staying on Dynamics AX on-premises. First of all, reduced agility, limitations to scaling up and down. In other systems, if we need to implement a bigger server, we have to take down the servers, take down the system, implement a new server, move it to the new system, migrate the databases, et cetera, et cetera. There's a whole infrastructure that we need to be responsible for. In this, in a vibrant environment of mergers and acquisition, it takes time, it takes risk, and it limits agility in this case. Flexibility in general. So access to data. This is a point we'll address later about cybersecurity. But if we need to do reporting on the system, we have to expose it to the reporting systems that are being used. For example, Power BI or other reporting tools. With this system, it's very, very secure. Microsoft spends more than $1 billion in cybersecurity, but it's also more flexible in the cloud, less flexible on premises. So making this available is a hurdle, and we see many customers that have a gold mine of data in their ERP, could be trending, for example, for production orders and so on, that is really not readily accessible, requires a whole project. Security. As I said multiple times, this is really the big point. Microsoft invests more than $1 billion in cybersecurity per year. So implementing this in the cloud gives us the benefit of that investment. If we do it ourselves, we don't have the time to invest $1 billion or even $1 million in cybersecurity, most of us. And that means struggle to keep up to date with latest security needs, trends, skills, and software tools. We're doing a project now on a different solution in which the upgrade is only due to cybersecurity. That's the only reason. It's not dynamic. So this is a key point that auditors will look at. Vulnerability to interruption of service. So if we go to the cloud, we need internet connectivity. That's clear. So that is the single attention point we need to look at, and we can make it redundant. If we stay on premises, we can have a disk problem. We can have an electricity problem. The light could go out. We can have any types of problems, hardware problems, CPUs, RAM, something that needs to be replaced on the fly. We have to put in server A, server B, server C, make sure that there's load balancing between them. If something breaks, somebody has to go there and make the other one work. Maybe it's late at night and you work on 3 production cycles, so 24 hours, and the system just stops working. So moving in the cloud versus staying on premises gives us that higher availability that is a vulnerability staying on premises. Disaster recovery, same thing. Of course, that has to be established, but the disaster recovery is not only for the data. the disaster recovery has to be also for the IT environment that supports that. So how complex is it to put this in place? This meaning a hardware, software, database recovery in the shortest amount of time. How sure are we that our backups are actually working? Because, I mean, many companies do it. Some companies really do it only partially. Have you ever shut down everything, assuming everything goes down, and measure the time it takes to restart this? That's the key point. So this is a key risk that luckily doesn't happen often. So we have to do risk mitigation based on probability of risk versus the impact of the risk, but the impact of the risk is very, very high. And ultimately the cost. Total cost to maintain legacy systems is becoming higher and higher, and this cost is offsetting the migration cost. So of course there's a cost in migrating, it's a project. But the accumulated cost of staying on the current version is higher, and at the end, when eventually you'll have to migrate, that cost will be thrown away. So just from a pure financial perspective, analyzing the balance between the cost of maintaining the legacy system for 3 years versus doing the project will indicate that it's time to do this migration project to the cloud. And I hear many questions on this in one-to-ones with customers, so feel free to put them in the chat, and then we'll address them at the end of the presentation. Okay, benefits and risks of migrating to Microsoft Dynamics 365 for finance and operations. Just to stress, because we don't call it out every single time, our solution is built on Microsoft Dynamics 365 for finance and operations, which is the product that is the new version of Dynamics AI. So the first point, we spoke about cybersecurity a little bit, going a little bit more in depth. It is critical in our industry to maintain and work in a trusted cloud. So the cloud, there are various clouds. There's Azure, there's AWS, and so on. Microsoft is the only solution in the world, only company in the world that has simultaneously the best cloud and the best applications. You can have big ERP and enterprise software solutions that have a so-and-so cloud because they don't have the breadth. You can have a big cloud, but then those companies don't have the enterprise application. In our case, Microsoft is the only company in the world that has both, starting from Azure, Microsoft Cloud, all the way to the infrastructure, Microsoft Windows, to security with logins and so on, Active Directory, going to the database, Microsoft SQL Server, and ultimately the business application, the Microsoft Dynamics 365 ERP. So the buck stops here. Everything comes from one source. Everything has to fit together. When different pieces of the cloud with applications don't fit together, that is definitely a risk. That becomes a point of strength if instead you have a single provider for all that. And that provider, not just for the enterprise software, but for everything, for Office, for Windows, for the IaaS, so infrastructure, IaaS, infrastructure as a service, and so on, provides a controlled, compliant cloud. So security, transparency, this is critical. Healthcare data stays in the customer's physical selected country. So you cannot say which server it is, but if you're in Germany, you can say, I want my server to be in Germany. If you're in the UK, my data has to be in the UK. There are local laws that require this. Microsoft allows to configure this. In some countries like the US, you can even have multiple regions. Compliant. So the systems are audited by third parties. This is part of our offering as well. There's a compliance center, a trust center, and third parties are periodically auditing and checking that Microsoft remains compliant to standards and produce this documentation, which is part of a cloud audit. So the infrastructural qualification, IQ in the cloud, requires to do what we call cloud qualification and cybersecurity qualification. So security and the actual cloud, that's the IQ in the cloud. And Microsoft gives us a lot of documentation out of the box to help us assure compliance and prove that this system is doing what it's supposed to be doing in a safe manner. Privacy and control. Another point, again, Microsoft, not only the data stays in your local region, which is critical, but the data is not accessed by Microsoft in any way. Even though it's in Microsoft Cloud, there are very strong contracts that show that, and practices, of course, in place, that assure that your GMP data that may be in the cloud will never be accessed by anyone, or any data for that matter, not just GMP. The only thing that Microsoft does is they monitor the performance of the environment. For example, if you have 10 billion doses, the system might slow down, and Microsoft monitors the 10 billion lines in the system in order to scale automatically and seamlessly, adding RAM, adding power to that virtual environment that is supporting your system without in any way looking at the actual data. It looks at transactions and performance. That's called telemetry. This is another benefit of going to the cloud. So ultimately, there's an unmatched commitment to privacy for both personnel and GMP data and all data, cybersecurity, more than $1 billion invested per year, and ultimately compliance. And now let's go to benefits. We spoke about concerns about risk. This is important because we need to move away from the on-premises obsolete versions that are not supported anymore. Now, why move to something, not just away from something? First of all, cloud architecture allows us to use the ERP from everywhere and on any type of device. The new version, as I'm sure you all know, it has a browser interface. So while the functionality is the same and the logic is pretty much the same, but the interface has changed. It's in the browser. The advantage is that we don't need to have those terminal server or Citrix installations that require additional hardware and additional maintenance and software. The system does it for us. It performs very well. It's available directly through a browser, and we can use it even in smaller devices. So, for example, the handheld devices. Now we have a handheld device app for warehouse management. Cloud architecture reduces the cost of IT infrastructure and maintenance. Again, database server, Active Directory connectivity. Remember when we had all the people in the office, hammering in the walls because they were connecting and everything, and then they had to make a new server room, and the server room was really noisy because it had all these fans and everything, and then sometimes the fan stopped working, it was warm, and then the servers were overheating. All that goes completely away. It's managed by Microsoft in these gigantic server farms, which are very interesting. They're all exactly the same around the world. So it's very easy for Microsoft to maintain scale. And those costs and those thoughts and worries just go away. The user interface, as I was saying, is similar, and the processes are the same. They're extended, if anything, but they haven't changed compared to the previous version. So we've done already various migrations. We have various customers that went from 2012 specifically to Dynamics 365, and we have established best practices on how to do this. Often we see that it's possible to repurpose your test scripts, your URS, user requirement specification for sure, and to a certain degree also test scripts. Maybe it takes a 30, 20 even % effort to adapt them to the new version, but not more than that, because the functionality has remained the same, even though a lot more has been added. So ultimately, our validation scripts and our validation effort can be used, and even our training documentation. The big change is the screenshots. The screenshots will have to change. But everything else with minor adaptations can be maintained, especially if one knows both the old and the new system. Going a little bit to more technical aspects, efficient and economical failover management, disaster recovery, and data redundancy. Microsoft distributes the data across 3 geographical locations and at least 2 tectonic plates, meaning that if there's an earthquake, our data is still safe. This is just an example of something that is very, very costly and often cannot even be implemented if done by ourselves. Going to the application, because we spoke a lot about the cloud, about the infrastructure, databases, Active Directory, login security, that's critical. But then going a little further, what happens in the cloud is that companies tend to standardize. So we'll talk about this a little more, but the AX for Pharma 365, powered by Dynamics 365 for finance and operations, is a commercial off-the-shelf GAMP5 Category 4 solution that covers pharmaceutical processes, biotech processes, medical device processes out of the box without requiring customization. One of the big efforts, one of the big concerns, we'll see a little later, in moving to the cloud is the cost and complexity of moving customizations. We can help with that. And we see even large companies that say, okay, let's not throw away, but let's critically review years and years of changes we made because we didn't have a better option. And let's see how many of these we can shed and replace with a standard solution from Microsoft enhanced functionality, because Microsoft invested a lot in the past years, and with AX for Pharma modules, which are made only for our industry. For example, LIMS, Laboratory Information Management System, Warehouse Management, Weighing and Dispensing. This ultimately reduces the TCO, total cost of ownership, because we are mandated to maintain that through the years and not you. We have a new version from Microsoft. We have to make it current. I'm sure there are a lot of questions here, so can please add them to the chat and we'll address them at the end. This is building on the total cost of ownership discussion. Forrester is a research analyst, IT research analyst, and they did an impact study to review what was the saving of companies that went specifically from Dynamics AX to Dynamics 365 for finance and operations. 3.4% total cost of ownership savings, 6 months payback, and 109% ROI, return on investment. So we can share this information with you. Of course, we'd be happy to do that. But often we wait to change because we just have the inertia in doing something, and we have so much else to do, especially in our industry that's so vibrant and creating all these new therapeutics, especially during COVID. There's a moment in which there's a tipping point in which we have to make that change. The good thing is that financially it'll bring benefits. So it's not a project that needs to be sold as a pure lost cost that sometimes were upgrades. This is actually going to bring savings. So it's not a financial issue. It's more finding the resources, the time, and just, embracing the need of doing this. So now, how do we move to the cloud? Because we've been discussing about moving away from on-premises, the risks of being on-premises, moving with a legacy of obsolete applications, the benefits of moving to the cloud, the benefits of moving to a cloud with a standardized solution like AX for Pharma, and now how can this be done? So Microsoft has an offering that we're allowed to propose, which is called the Standard Migration Assessment, SMA, meaning that there's a technique to assess your current situation, the data you have, customizations you may have, and these customizations, how to then port them to a standard solution. And in addition to this, we offer our GXP Fast Track Rapid Implementation methodology. This is comprising the actual solution, because the first point is we need to, for example, electronic signature. We need to have features like electronic signature. We need to be compliant with 21 CFR Part 11 in the US and European Annex 11 in Europe. Microsoft Dynamics out of the box is not compliant with this, as you probably know. So as a minimum, it's missing lockout and expiry date. Lockout meaning if we do a brute force attack, the system will block us after a certain number of incorrect passwords. And expiry means after a certain number of months, the system has to request to reset the password. This is not available out of the box. So our system adds the functionality, adds the requirement, the URS, user requirement, to require this. So telling you already what may be the gaps compared to standard regulations. And also we offer the test script to test the requirement. So we have the functionality, we have the knowledge, of course, we have the test script, and we have the URS. So combining these two, we can implement a new cost solution that can be easily maintained in the cloud, reducing the cost, and at the same time moving to an evergreen solution, ultimately having a safe and successful migration. This is a little bit more detail, but it's a sample migration plan. So how can this actually be done? These are a few of the steps that we cover. It's not the whole detail, but it's a good starting point. We start with an evaluation of the current situation. So solution assessment, which is business process review of customizations, review of what technology has been implemented. Maybe there are ancillary solutions. Maybe there's a way to connect with handheld devices and scales that needs to be supported and implemented. And basically this is most of what we do. Of course, we have new projects with new customers, but a lot of our business is helping companies like yours, because after years of working with maybe a good partner that doesn't understand the industry, there's a fatigue in having to explain every single regulation. In our case, we assess where you are, and advise what regulations may not be covered today and how to cover them. Another example is second-person verification. Most companies do this by hand. So if I need to change a sensitive field on the item table, I just change it. So I have a piece of paper, I have a PDF, whatever, a form, I change that field, and then when it's done on the paper, give it to someone, everybody signs off on it, and somebody in the ERP makes the change. That's cumbersome. In our case, given that this is a requirement worldwide, we have a configuration called second-person verification. And you can determine which field needs to be approved. Somebody can insert the tentative proposed new value in the system, and then somebody else can sign off on it. Only when the second person signs off on it, the field becomes active in the ERP. And this is reducing QA effort, but if one doesn't know what second-person verification means, then this is never going to happen. So once we do this assessment, reviewing where you are, the data, the parts of the system that are being used, possible needs that emerge over years, and especially customizations, we create a pilot. A pilot, we also call it virtual room pilot. And that is because, of course, it's not conference room pilot anymore. It's not CRP, it's VRP now. And that pilot is based on best practices. So we can do it very, very quickly. We already have ready-made templates for pharma, for biotech, for medical devices as well. The customer I was referring to, Inovio, is a case study on our website. They actually are a combination medical device biotech company, very, very innovative, developing DNA vaccines, which is one step before the mRNA done by Pfizer and Moderna. And we can cover those three with ready-made templates. Either use your data, if that's the preference, or do it on our demo data. Very quickly show you how it could be done. Of course, highlighting the parts that you're looking for that came out through the solution assessment. And then we do the implementation. Implementation is quite standard, so I won't go into detail about how to run an ERP implementation. But the critical point is validation. How do we do validation in the cloud? So we have, again, best practices, given that our offering is both ERP, the software, implementation, but also the validation. So during the project, we already have to set up the system to be validated, implementing in a way that we can perform the IQ or QPQ processes for achieve validation, and looking at continuous validation. So we set up initial validation during the project to then enact and support continuous validation, which includes upgrades. So validation and upgrades are not the same thing, but every time we upgrade, we need to revalidate. That's why this one, continuous validation with managed services that we offer, actually allows you to remain on a finally current solution. Not, let's say, 3 years on a solution, let's say 10 years on a solution, and then see what happens when we finally have to bite the bullet and we have to move up. In our case, it's not the case anymore. This is the evergreen Microsoft vision of the cloud. 2 upgrades per year. We recommend 3 because 2 is a little tight because we might not exactly make it. We have all the timelines, the experience to do that. And the managed services part also helps us perform what's called, you know it well, many of you, risk assessment. Whenever there's a new version, we do a risk assessment from a GMP perspective and assess if the system may impact in any way product quality, patient safety, and so on. We check that and implement that both from an IT perspective, that's the operations and managed services part, but also from a validation perspective. And this is where, for example, automated testing comes into play. This is where we have to look at automated testing and look at how to perform the deliverables to maintain a system validated through time. So last considerations when migrating to Dynamics 365 for finance and operations. First of all, we have to consider the cost and complexity of the migration. Sorry, so what is the cost? The full cost of the TCO, total cost of ownership, of doing it, but also of not doing it. We have to assess continuous updates and how they impact validation. There's virtual infrastructure. Is there any infrastructure, is there any software surrounding our current software that needs to be migrated? Would that go in the cloud? Would that stay on premises? How do the two maintain connectivity? And this is linked also to data migration upgrades and key technology dependencies. So all these together basically advise us, inform us on how to take your current system and uplift it to the cloud considering all the different implications and how these systems are currently interconnected, but also how they're validated. Again, the key point is that there's a desert of, okay, I can do technical work, but what is the impact on validation? We need to assess that, and that's done with our methodology at the beginning of the assessment. Very important, critical, cybersecurity and compliance. As we said, the biggest concern for the cloud is security of the data and security from intrusion, from cybersecurity attacks, cyber attacks. So there are best practices in general and for our industry that can be implemented in order to minimize the risk and maximize the value, because actually there are many studies that say that being in the cloud, in a secure cloud, is safer than having data on premises. Ultimately, organizational change management. When moving to the cloud, it can be done as a technical effort. That's fine. It's called lift and shift, and we can do that. Or it can be done by reorganizing business processes whenever possible, re-engineering, reorganizing. And the way to do that is to assess if something is done that way only because it's a habit versus because if it's a regulatory requirement or it's a uniqueness of your industry. So the consultant that works on this has to have the experience and expertise to assess if a change brings you added value or a strategic competitive advantage, or if it's just historical. Maybe there was a manager 10 years ago that wanted something, and then Dynamics with AX for Pharma has another way to do it. So this organizational change management, coupled with the porting of complex customizations, can bring more standardization and can bring best practices. So one key point that the partner would need is, okay, I don't need you to teach me GMP, pharma, life sciences. Of course, we want to learn how specific companies, we can learn how your company is functioning, but not what it means to have, for example, an approved vendor list with a qualified vendor status. That's something we implemented, and we don't need someone to train us on it. Of course, your interpretation we would like to understand, but not train us on the concept, because that's part of our best practices implemented in the solution. So there is significant potential for adding new features, which are out of the box, both in X for Pharma and in Dynamics, that can serve maybe unmet needs today. So it's not just the cost saving from a technical perspective, as we saw with the Forrester study, but there's also higher customer user satisfaction, organizational satisfaction, and ultimately implementing changes in a less painful way. Because you all know what it meant to add a patch, to add a new feature, something comes up. We now have a way to do this repetitively without the pain of the past. So it's also putting us on a better highway for the future. So that said, what would be the next steps? Analyze the impact of the organization for moving to the cloud. This is important. Are we ready? And this is something we can offer. We have a lot of experience on this and can, offer best practices, recommendations, suggestions, just experiences of what happens when moving to the cloud. For example, training of your IT team. The IT team will have to be trained on something called LCS, Lifecycle Services, and how LCS fits with validation. So that is the environment Microsoft uses to host Dynamics in the cloud. We know how that all fits together, of course. Create a strategy to gradually, seamlessly migrate to the cloud. It doesn't have to be abrupt. It doesn't have to be all in one. You have your business to run. So again, we have different best practices and then implemented different strategies based on your needs. We'll absolutely do it based on your needs, but this one is critical to move to the cloud in a seamless way. Performance comparisons with your existing applications. Is this the opportunity to implement, for example, Enterprise Asset Management, the new module from Microsoft that we extended? So can we move from a different solution that manages calibration or reactor maintenance and so on, and move it inside the ERP with the advantage of managing spare parts, of managing cost, the cost of repairing the product and so on. Network challenges. This is important. It's critical to assess the performance. So one of the recommendations in moving to the cloud is to assess upload and download speed. Maybe bandwidth needs to be enhanced. That's one of the consequences, but at least we know what it is. We don't find out throughout the project. we know what these aspects are. Reliability and availability. So confirming that if you have best practices for data redundancy today, make sure that in the cloud they meet or exceed what you're doing, and if not, find ways to do that. We have, of course, these techniques, already done it. And ultimately, develop a checklist internally on what the cloud provider that will offer this upgrade to you, what do you need from them? Do you need, of course, Dynamics competence? Do you need life sciences competence? Do you need an ISV solution? Maybe it's not needed, the ISV part, because you're only distributing, you're not manufacturing. But maybe you do need some of electronic signature. So assessing what the cloud provider can offer is critical geographical coverage to assess who could be the right partner to do this. We work both with local partners and we work by ourselves. So most of our projects are done directly by us, but we are also happy to collaborate with partners. If you already have a partner you're satisfied with, bringing that GMP knowledge and also bringing the expertise of the migration and a vertical solution that makes a GAM5 category 4. And ultimately, this is also all about risk mitigation. So highlighting all these risks, highlighting the checklist and the areas where maybe the provider is not covering your needs, and then at that point determine who could be the right provider or set of providers for the services, for the potential ISV solutions, and for the validation. So to learn more, download our white papers and fact sheets, please. Contact us and schedule a standard migration assessment.